15 Things I Wish I Knew was one of my most popular videos to date. A number of people told me they found it useful, so I decided to have a round 2. Diving right in, I wanted to talk about rapid fire spellcasting. As a mage, you typically can expect to have a delay between casting spells so that your character can perform the relevant animations. Well, on Horseback, there's actually no animation. You can just keep firing fireballs until you run out of magicka. This is actually really useful when trying to take out targets quickly, especially those such as frost giant trolls that have regen, because you can do an insane amount of damage in a short period of time that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Adding on to this, it vastly increases the value of magicka potions, because if you pop them, you can just keep firing until your enemy is dead. There is a drawback to this method, which is that if you need to dual cast, you will have to get off of your horse to do so, because the game will not let you dual cast on horseback for some reason. I initially thought this was due to you needing to have at least one hand on your horse to keep steady, but you can still cast 2 separate spells at once, such as Heal Self and Fireball, or single cast Fireball from both hands simultaneously. Shifting focus to one of my nemesises, the Enchanted Spheres, I have a couple quick tips on how to get past them. The first part worth mentioning is that having a tank that can sustain multiple heavy hits from them is very useful at making them easier to take down. For spellcasters who use Conjuration, a recommendation I have is Spirit Trolls because their health regeneration allows them to often stay alive for most, if not all, of their duration. You additionally could create a spell scroll out of the spell to let them fight longer and keep your magicka pool healthy. Whether you're a melee or a spellcaster, having a Storm Atronach scroll is incredibly useful against them since lightning damage stuns their health regeneration. Topping this off, using a staff with lightning damage also helps nullify the regen, allowing you to use your free hand to land devastating blows even as a one-handed character. Something I didn't realize was just how useful it was to complete the Dark Brotherhood questline. While there are several very good armor and weapon pieces you will find along the way, in my opinion, the best reward comes only after the main sanctuary has been destroyed and you pay to have the new one renovated. With full renovations, you get a number of shrine buffs, such as a 25% buff to sneaking for 24 hours, or 25 skill point buff to smithing, enchanting, or alchemy. The best part here is that they are all for 24 hours and can all be active at the same time. The 25% sneak buff in particular is very nice for characters who try to sneak occasionally, but that you don't really want to use your valuable perk points in the sneak tree for. Another gem you receive from the Dark Brotherhood quest is Shadowmere. Not only is it great because you get a free horse, but in the event that he dies, you can go to the spawning pool outside of the original Dark Brotherhood Asylum's location, and he will respawn anew. It's unclear whether or not he will respawn with the items previously in his inventory, so this is something to keep in mind. Looking back at a previous tip about machine gunning fireballs, an issue I have run into as a spellcaster is most of my followers and horses end up dying by my own hand when I accidentally shoot them with a fireball or a lightning blast bounces off of an enemy directly into them. Shadowmere has a much larger pool of health, allowing him to tank a number of hits. Additionally, his health regeneration is very solid, so even if I hit him a couple times, he'll be back to full health in no time. This next tip is more niche, but something I ran into quite a few times. Occasionally, your game will bug out when you go to interact with something such as a portable enchanting supplies or an alchemy bench. What will happen instead of the usual animation where your character interacts with the object and a menu box opens is that you will just stand there endlessly with no message box and no way to exit the animation. For me, I often just reloaded my previous save and started from where I'd saved last. While this technically does work, it's frustrating to have to do this often, especially if you didn't save recently. What you can do instead is press the insert key and choose the positions option. I'm not sure it matters which of these you choose, but for me personally, I always chose kneel or sleep, which then overrides the previous animation. From here, you just move around and you are now able to walk around again. Hopefully this helps someone else. In one of my playthroughs, this was incredibly prevalent and was such a lifesaver when I figured it out. Also, something that the dev team recommends is if you see something like this, or any sort of animation style bug, exit your instance of Wildlander completely and load back in. Unfortunately, with the way it works, it can cause issues to your previous saves and your future ones, so just something to keep in mind as well. The next tip affects every playstyle, whether you are sword and board, pure mage, or you plan to take Alduin on with a spoon. Regardless of how many attribute points you put into stamina, once you are down to 20%, there are a number of different abilities inhibited. For one, you move around like a snail, no longer able to swiftly escape foes. Also, due to being worn out, you no longer have a firm grip on your held equipment, such as swords and shields, and you have an increased chance to drop them. Also, the damage you do is significantly less when you are this low on stamina, making it much more useful to get away before you drop this low, and use some potions to catch your breath. Additionally, this affects your likelihood of chopping wood off of a tree. You may notice that as you chop trees, eventually you hit a point where you have to hit the tree over and over and over again before you get any wood back. This is likely the cause. As a spellcaster, you are not immune to this issue either. Your spell costs are heavily impacted by having 20% or less stamina available because the cost of your spells skyrockets once you cross that threshold. I'm not sure if this is just a me thing, but when starting a new Wildlander character, I'm often lulled into a false sense of security where the weather is mildly cold but not too bad overall. Assuming I don't dive into a frozen lake, usually I have more than enough time to gather wood and make a campfire whenever I need it. Because of this, I often sideline leveling up my campfire skills because I just assume that I'm generally going to be fine. Wrong. What actually happens is, while my skills do not improve because there is a season system in Wildlander, it gradually only gets colder as the days go on. Typically around the level 25 mark is when this starts to hit hard, where no longer am I able to comfortably roam freely because the weather limits movement heavily. It's not terrible around places like Whiterun, for instance, that are not only directly next to several encampments or towns, and also are in warmer climates, but places like Dawnstar, Windhelm, Solitude, etc. are just terrible by that point. What I've realized is that it's very useful early on to invest time into improving your campfire skills, as this will give you a naturally higher warmth rating and combat some of the other difficulties you can run into, such as campfires taking too long to heat up properly or not lasting quite long enough. My recommendation is to use this system as often as possible early on to help combat the weather getting colder with time. A frustrating realization I've had is that some followers just suck. Not only this, but they will always suck regardless of their level. The reason for this is that in Requiem, which is the basis for the Wildlander mod pack, perks are king. Perks give massive improvements to strength, abilities, and versatility. So followers who do not have perks, or have very few perks, will likely not be all that useful unless you plan on using them as some sort of pack mule for your equipment. On top of this, they will not be able to get any perks because whatever perks NPCs start with are the only perks they will ever have due to how Skyrim is currently set up. My recommendation is to check an NPC's perks before getting too committed to having them in your party. This will allow you to plan whether or not they are worth having to accompany you. It also lets you know what is the best way to build them. For example, are they heavily perked into heavy armor? If so, it makes more sense to give them heavy armor to wear instead of evasion, because they will suffer all of the penalties of wearing evasion armor and gain very few benefits from doing so. The same is true of their combat. If they have only perks and archery, they will likely not make a good melee follower. A free tip for followers is that you may have noticed them having clunky mapping, and so they either will not follow you properly or will get stuck on objects between you and them. While I do not recommend adjusting their tactics whatsoever due to the clunkiness of follower live package, I do recommend pressing the G key whenever you encounter these issues because it sort of refreshes their movement patterns, and for me at least will fix the issues quite often. Another not so great realization I had as I found several different pieces of Daedric armor was that it all had a curse on it, essentially making wearing this gear impossible because the life drain effect was so strong that I would die in a matter of seconds. Originally, I thought that this was always the case with Daedric gear, which was a huge bummer since Daedric armor is super cool looking and incredibly powerful. This actually has a good turn of events because in the event that you are looking for the non-cursed Daedric armor, the wiki has a list of all hand-placed gear that is useful for the player character. To my understanding, any armor not on this list will be cursed. Now that we're discussing armor, a free tip when you're trying to get the best armor or trying to have your armor upgraded is you can go to Wildlander Greymane, who's actually the best blacksmith in the game. Now, the main requirement here is you need to progress through the Companions questline up to the point where you're part of the Inner Circle and you become a werewolf. Jumping off of the best smith in the game being Wildlander Greymane, the skill levels of the enchanters greatly affects their ability when enchanting your gear. While it doesn't hurt to have any enchanter improve your gear, with enchantments there are two whose abilities overshadow the rest. At the College of Winterhold is Sergius Tyrannius, a level 100 enchanter. His enchantments are more powerful than those of other enchanters, which is a big help for players purposely avoiding enchanting gear themselves. There are two ways that I know of to get access to his enchanting. The first is to pass the test of casting one of 3 adept level spells for the college. After this, you have access to his enchantments right away. In the event that you are not a spellcaster whatsoever but are a dragonborn, once you get to the point in the main quest where you are trying to locate the Elder Scroll, you are sent to the college and can make use of Sergius as an enchanter. Alternately, you can travel to Solstheim in search of Neloth from Tel Mithrin, who also possesses the unique talent to enchant at the highest level. You can use a boat to travel to him, avoiding much of the dangers that are home to Solstheim. In the event that neither of these options are within your character's means, I was informed by a subscriber that Calcemo from Windhelm is also a great option as his abilities are at level 80 and he is available immediately without any requirements. Thank you for the tip, by the way. These were the 10 tips I had. Was there anything I missed or tips you've learned that you find useful? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and consider subscribing. Stay safe, Wildlanders.